Picture a garden, not the kind you're thinking of, not raised beds and weekend trips to a garden centre and little plastic markers with the Latin names printed on them. Not a hobby, not a lifestyle choice. Picture a strip of earth barely wider than your arm span, wedged between the back wall of a timber-framed house and the beginning of an open field. Dark soil, permanently damp, smelling of something between mud and medicine, between rot and life, between something you want to breathe deeper and something that makes the back of your throat prickle with warning. Plants growing so close together their leaves overlap, their roots tangling underneath, invisible, fighting each other for every inch of cold English clay. No organisation you would recognise, no rows, no labels, just years of accumulated planting, layer upon layer, things that were here before the woman who tends them was born, things she put in herself, things that seeded themselves without anyone's permission and turned out to be exactly what was needed. Add a woman crouching over them in the grey before dawn, her hands moving through the stems with the absolute certainty of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Her fingers finding what they're looking for without her eyes helping at all, like a musician finding notes in the dark. Add bundles of dried plants hanging from every low beam of the cottage behind her. The smell of them is extraordinary, sharp and almost bitter and almost sweet at once, like the idea of medicine before medicine became a profession, like healing before it became a business. Add mud on her hands, calluses on her knees, a mind full of knowledge that the priest at the village church has started calling, in careful and worrying language, suspicious. That's the herb garden. Small enough to step over in 3 strides, more powerful than anything the apothecary in the market town sells at 4 times the price. The difference between a child surviving a fever and a child not surviving it. The difference between a woman being able to do something about the pain gripping her lower back and a woman having nothing to do about it at all. The difference between a wound closing cleanly and a wound turning black. We're going back there tonight. Not as people reading a sanitized version of medieval medicine in a history book, the kind where everything is safely academic and the entries are organised alphabetically and nobody mentions the part where the women who carried this knowledge were sometimes accused of witchcraft for carrying it. Not as tourists, not as observers, we're living it. 1 year, 1 garden, 1 young woman learning what grows and what heals and what kills and what does all 3 depending on the dose. Everything she would have touched and smelled and tasted on a careful tongue and survived, and the things she barely survived, and the things she saw and couldn't look away from, and the things she understood only slowly, the way you understand anything that matters. Here's what you should know before we begin. Medieval herb gardens were not unusual. They were not exotic. They were not the province of mysterious crones on the edges of forests, though those women existed and we'll meet one. They were the back garden of almost every woman in England. Common knowledge, women's knowledge, the kind passed from mother to daughter to granddaughter, generation after generation, for so long that nobody could remember a time before it. For so long that when monks began writing it down in their herbals, Hildegard of Bingen in Germany, the school of Salerno in Italy, later the English herbalists who'd eventually lead to Nicholas Culpeper, they were already getting parts of it wrong, already losing the specific practical knowledge that lived in women's hands and memories and nowhere else. That knowledge was not written down mostly. It was safer that way. Usually. I make these histories. I genuinely don't know if anyone actually sleeps to them. or if you're all just people who've tried everything else and ended up here, lying in the dark while someone tells you about medieval plant women in great detail. Both groups are welcome. Neither of you has to explain yourselves. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you want. The garden will still be there. Here we go. Your eyes open to grey, not darkness. England in early spring is grey before it's anything else. A flat, diffuse, unpromising light that comes through the shuttered window like it's apologising for itself. Not enough to see by, just enough to know that sleep is over. For a moment, just a moment, the brief mercy of half a second, you don't know where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not one smell. It's never one smell in this cottage. It's a whole conversation of smells, layered one over the other, speaking about everything that has been dried or brewed or boiled or bundled in this room since the woman who lives here was young. Lavender, first and strongest, because there are bundles of it hanging from every crossbeam, and it has been here so long that the smell has soaked into the timber itself. Not the polite lavender of modern sachets. Full, rich, almost overwhelming. The smell of 100 lavender plants dried at their peak, crushed slightly as you turn in the night and brush against the hanging bundles. Under that, something sharper. Wormwood. It smells like the edge of something. Like a boundary you're not supposed to cross. Like medicine before medicine is comfortable. Under that, the damp of old timber and earthen floors and the perpetual English seep of water through walls that were never quite waterproof to begin with. The smell of cold lived-in stone. The smell of winters that never fully leave. And underneath all of it, something sweet and slightly rotten from the corner where the compost is. The stems and leaves and spent roots of last year's plant slowly becoming next year's earth. And smoke. Always smoke. From the fire that never fully goes out. Wood smoke and peat smoke and the specific smell of something Marjorie was heating last night. You fell asleep before you could ask what it was. Something medicinal. Something dark. Welcome to Derbyshire, England. 1321. You're lying on a pallet in the corner of Marjorie Brant's cottage, which is about 20 feet long and 12 feet wide, and contains more information per square inch than anywhere else in this village, or possibly in this entire county. The pallet is straw, covered with a rough linen sheet, and you've been sleeping on it for 47 days. You've stopped noticing how uncomfortable it is. That's either adaptation or defeat, and at this point you're not sure which. Your name is Agnes Wharton. You're 17 years old. You arrived here in the deepest part of February, when the fields were iron hard and the sky sat on the village like a lid. You arrived because your mother sent you. Your mother sent you because her own mother had studied with Marjorie Brant 30 years ago, and the knowledge passed between them had saved 3 lives that Agnes's mother can name. Her first daughter, her own mother in the fever year, and a neighbour's boy who stepped on a rusted scythe and should not have survived the wound. You'll learn what she knows, your mother said, helping you pack the one bundle you were allowed to bring, and you'll remember it better than I did. You're sharper than I was at your age. A pause. Don't let us see that you think so. Your mother knew Marjorie, still does. They have a complicated relationship built on respect and wariness, the way people who deal in powerful things often do. So, here you are. 47 days in, and you've learned to identify 23 plants by smell alone. To tell the difference between chamomile dried at the right moment and chamomile dried 2 days past the right moment, and to keep your mouth shut when Marjorie's working and to open it only when she asks. That last one was the hardest lesson. The church bells ring for prime. Not nearby. The church in your village is a half-mile walk. But sound travels differently in the early morning, through cold air, over frost-stiff fields. The bell sounds like it's sitting next to you. Marjorie is already up. You can hear her. The soft scratch of her moving across the earthen floor, the particular rhythm of her step, left foot heavier than right, because of the accident 3 years before you came, because of the horse that startled, because of the ditch that was deeper than it looked. She doesn't talk about it. You know about it because Thomas, the smith's apprentice in the village, told you in the careful way he tells you things he thinks are important, watching your face for a reaction. Does it slow her down? You asked him. Nothing slows her down, he said. That's what's strange about it. He wasn't wrong. You push yourself up from the pallet, the air hits. You immediately, cold and sharp and smelling of everything at once. Your breath makes a small cloud. You pull the blanket around your shoulders like a shawl and sit there for a moment, organizing your body into something functional. Your hands ache. This is new as of the last 2 weeks. Marjorie has had you digging and turning beds, and your palms have blistered and the blisters have hardened into calluses that are still in the process of hardening. Your right thumb has a crack in the skin at the first joint that reopens every time you make a fist. You have tried everything you know about healing cracked skin. Marjorie watched you try, said nothing, and then handed you a small pot of something she'd made, beeswax and rendered fat and something that smells like calendula, and the crack was better by the next morning. You still don't know exactly what she put in it. She'll tell you when she thinks you're ready. This is how learning works here. You're up, Marjorie says, not a question, not a greeting, a notation. Yes. Good. The sound of something being poured. Come eat. Breakfast is pottage, always pottage, in this cottage, in this season, in every cottage in this village, and probably every village in England at this moment in the year 1321. It's the same pottage it's been for a month. Oats boiled with dried peas and whatever herbs Marjorie decides it needs that morning. Today she's put in something that makes it taste vaguely of thyme and something else, something slightly medicinal, something you can almost but not quite identify. You eat it standing, because the only chairs in this cottage are Marjorie's, the high-backed one by the fire, and the low, three-legged stool she uses when she's working. And you've understood without being told that neither of them is yours. Marjorie eats standing too. You have never seen her sit at a meal. You've started to wonder if she sits at all when you're not watching. She is 53 years old. She looks both older and younger than that, older in her hands and her face, which have been weathered by decades of outdoor work and the particular grinding of a life spent in service to other people's emergencies. Younger in her eyes, which are the light grey-green of lichen on old stone, and which watch everything with the bright, slightly unsettling attention of a bird. She's about 5 feet 2 inches tall. She weighs considerably less than you. She has outlasted 2 husbands, 4 children, 2 surviving, and the judgment of every priest who has served this parish in the last 20 years. The current one, Father Edmund, is 26 years old and terrified of her. He says she is valuable. He says this in the careful voice of a person who is constructing a position they can retreat from if necessary. Marjorie is aware of this. She does not mention it. The rains last week, she says now, ladling a second helping into her own bowl, were good. For the garden, for everything. But yes, the ground's been too hard. Now it'll open up. She takes a spoonful of pottage. We'll start the cold hardy beds today. I want to show you the system before anything comes up. The garden. Good. This is what you came for, partly. The garden is where the real knowledge is, Marjorie has told you once in one of her rare explanatory moments. Anybody can dry a bundle of herbs and sell it. What matters is growing them. What matters is knowing the soil and the season, and the difference between a plant at its best and a plant that looks the same but isn't. What goes in first, you ask? Marjorie looks at you over the rim of her bowl. The look says, you should already know this. You think about it. Yarrow, you say, because it's already growing. You're not starting it, you're managing what's already there. A fractional nod. That's as close to approval as she gets before noon. And then? Comfrey. It comes back from the root. You don't plant it so much as guide it. And? You think harder. Wormwood, for the same reason. And the violets will self-seed, so that's not... I'm not asking about self-seeders. I'm asking what we put hands on today. What we're moving, what we're dividing, what we're choosing consciously to keep and what to cut back. This is the difference you're beginning to understand between someone who harvests a plant and someone who tends it, between someone who knows what a herb is good for and someone who knows how it lives. The garden is not a collection of useful plants. The garden is a system, a conversation. You have to know not just what each thing is, but what it wants, what it crowds out, what it cannot grow beside. You say, comfrey first, because it takes the most space and everything else has to go around it. Then the yarrow beds, because if you don't cut it back, it'll swallow the south corner. Then mugwort. A longer pause this time. Why mugwort? Because it spreads by root, you say, and if you wait too long into spring, it's already established somewhere you don't want it. Marjorie finishes her pottage, sets the bowl down on the shelf where everything that is not actively in use sits in a state of organised waiting. Mugwort, she says, we do last. Why? Because before we touch mugwort, I need to tell you some things. And I need to tell you some things before you're in the middle of the plant with your hands in it. A pause. Mugwort is not dangerous the way wolfsbane is dangerous. It's not going to kill you if you brush against it. But mugwort is one of the women's plants, and there are things about the women's plants that you need to understand completely before you work with them. Because the knowledge, once you have it, changes you. Changes what people expect of you, changes what you're responsible for. The fire crackles. Outside, through the small, imperfect window, the grey has lightened to something that might eventually become morning. All right, you say. Good. She moves toward the door, lifting the heavy iron latch with the same automatic efficiency as everything she does. Bring the spade, the small one, not the long-handled one, and the basket, the big basket. The garden is behind the cottage, accessed through a low wooden gate in a post and rail fence that is the boundary between what is managed and what is not. You've been through this gate dozens of times. You know the garden in winter, its brown stubble and frost-cracked earth. You know the way the beds are oriented. The longest bed running east-west to catch the most sun, the shorter beds running north-south on either side. The whole thing slightly larger than it looks from the gate, because the far end curves around the back of an old apple tree whose roots make part of the east bed impossible to dig deeply. But you have not seen the garden in spring, not properly, not when things are beginning. And what you see when Marjorie opens the gate and you step through behind her, what you see stops. You mid-step. Green. Not the dry brown and grey of everything for the last 2 months. Not the yellow beige of dead grass and spent stems. Green. Actually, insistently, stubbornly, impossibly green, given that it was snowing a fortnight ago. It's the yarrow mostly. Yarrow doesn't die. Not really. It retreats, goes flat, goes brown at the top. But underneath, the ferny basal leaves press against the soil, stay in dark green through the hardest part of winter, waiting. And now, in the slightly warmer wet of early spring, they're pushing up. The new growth is feathery and dark, coming up from the crowns of last year's plants so densely, it looks like something is trying urgently to say something. And the violets, yes, just as you said, they self-seed everywhere, small rosettes of heart-shaped leaves hugging the ground in every corner and crack, and comfrey sending up its first broad, rough-furred leaves from roots so deep and established they are essentially permanent. Leaves are already the size of your hand. They have this texture, hairy, bristly, slightly rough, that you remember being surprised by when Marjorie first made you run your hands over a full-grown plant last summer. You expected something soft, because comfrey is such a gentle medicine. The reality is a plant that feels like a mild rebuke. And in the corner nearest the house, something you haven't identified yet, low to the ground, with small grey-green leaves that even from a distance have that slightly dusty look of the Artemisia family. Not wormwood. You know wormwood, its taller habit, its silver grey. This is something smaller, more compact. What's that, you ask, nodding toward the corner. Southernwood, Marjorie says. Lad's love, some people call it. She doesn't elaborate immediately. She never elaborates immediately. She lets you hold the question. You hold it. And the other one beside it? Mugwort. She says it neutrally. Don't touch it yet. You look at it. From here, it looks like almost nothing. Early spring regrowth. A little tangle of stems with small leaves just beginning to unfurl. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would make you think. This plant changed women's lives for 1,000 years. This plant is the reason certain women were accused of things. This plant holds knowledge that is both medicine and something else. Something the church keeps deciding what to call. It just looks like a plant. They all do. The work of early morning is physical and particular. And you have been here long enough now to find a kind of peace in it that you didn't have at first. Comfrey first. Comfrey, Symphytum officinale, has a root like a thick, dark carrot, black on the outside, white when you cut into it, producing a mucilaginous substance that Marjorie calls the knitting matter, because it promotes the joining of broken things, bones, torn tissue, skin over wounds that have been cleaned and covered with a poultice made from the crushed leaves. It has, over the course of the centuries, been called knit bone, bruisewort, boneset, healing herb, slippery root, black wart. The variety of names tells you something, that this plant was known and used so widely, in so many places by so many different people, that each community developed its own name for it, without reference to anyone else's name. It was that common, that valuable. The root, when you dig into it, smells earthy and slightly sweet, like clean soil but with something extra. You're dividing the clump that's established in the northeast corner of the east bed, separating the thick central root from the runners that have spread outward. Each piece of root you cut away will, if replanted, become a new plant. Comfrey does not give up. You could remove 90% of a comfrey plant and the remaining 10% left in the ground would reconstitute itself over the course of a season. This is useful in a garden where plants have to survive not just weather, but neglect. Years when illness or childbirth or other crisis means the garden doesn't get the attention it needs. Press the roots in firmly, Marjorie says. She's working 3 feet away, her small spade moving with the efficient minimum motion technique of someone who has done this for 30 years. Don't tamp too hard. You're not trying to punish the soil, just enough that the root makes contact. How many divisions? 12 from this clump. We'll take 6 to the Hartleys. Eleanor's been asking about starting her own bed, and it's time. A pause while she works a particularly stubborn root free. When you deliver them, show her how to plant them. Don't just hand her the roots and leave. All right. And tell her what they're for, not just the bones. The leaf for the chest. It opens the airways, helps with the wet cough her husband gets every winter, and the root tea for stomach trouble. She knows some of it, but she doesn't know the chest use. You store this away. You're always storing things away. Eleanor Hartley has 4 children and a husband who works the Lord's mill and gets a wet, persistent cough every winter that sounds, from a distance of 20 yards, like something serious. She's pregnant with her 5th. She has the look of a woman who's been pregnant or nursing continuously for the last 8 years, which she probably has. The look of a person who exists at the edge of their physical capacity and has organised their entire life around managing that edge. You think about what it means to bring a plant to someone like that. To say, this is something you can do. This grows and you can grow it, and it helps. This is yours to know. This is a large part of what the garden is you're beginning to understand. Not just medicine in the abstract. Connection. Information moving person to person, hand to hand, garden to garden. The network of what women know and pass on and maintain. Marjorie doesn't say this in those terms. She doesn't romanticize it. But you see it in the way she answers questions, the way she gives things away, the way she makes sure you know who else in the village grows what and why. She's maintaining something, a system. You press the last comfrey root into the prepared hole, firm the soil, move to the next. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. The millefolium means 1,000 leaves, which refers to the finely divided, ferny quality of the foliage, each leaf cut into dozens of tiny leaflets, so the whole thing looks like something intricate and deliberate. The Achillea is from Achilles. The Greek hero was supposedly taught to use it for battle wounds by his centaur tutor Chiron. A story so old and so consistently repeated that you can't help but notice it's one of the origin stories for this plant across multiple cultures. Someone discovered that yarrow stops bleeding, and the story wrapped itself around that discovery. Of course, it was a warrior who first needed it. Of course, it was a god teacher who first knew it. In reality, every woman in this village knows yarrow. Most of them have a clump of it growing somewhere. It's the first thing you reach for when something's bleeding. The fresh leaf, crushed between your fingers and pressed directly to the cut. It has something in it that promotes clotting, something that also mildly numbs slightly, something that helps keep the wound from going septic. It has a smell that's impossible to describe accurately to anyone who hasn't met it. Sharp and green and slightly resinous, like the idea of green turned up too high, like someone took a fresh meadow and compressed it. The problem with yarrow, as Marjorie is demonstrating by cutting back the edges of the bed with a sharp, curved blade, is that left alone it will become everything. It spreads by both root and seed, and it is extremely good at both. A single plant given 3 or 4 years of inattention can colonize several square feet. In a garden where space is limited and every inch is accounted for, yarrow has to be managed constantly. When do you harvest it, you ask? You know the answer. You're asking because asking means she talks, and when she talks you learn things that aren't in the question. Flowers just opening, she says. Not fully open, the potency is highest when they're beginning. You lose something once they're full bloom. The leaf is useful year-round, but the flower is specific. She trims the edge of the bed with the careful attention she brings to everything. For the blood-stopping use, fresh leaf any time. For the fever-breaking tea, dried flower tops. For the other uses. She pauses. What other uses, you ask, because the pause was deliberate. Yarrow can regulate bleeding, she says, choosing her words with the care she uses for everything important. Not just stop it, regulate it. There are women who use it for their monthly courses. Too heavy, too little, too irregular. There are women who use it. Another, careful pause. For other things. The word other is doing a lot of work. Abortifacient, you say. You learned the word from a Latin text Marjorie has. One of the few books in this cottage, battered and water-stained, apparently dating from a monastery library and never returned. Marjorie looks at you. The word exists, she says, and Yarrow is one of the gentler ones, not reliable enough on its own to be the first choice, but combined with other things, mugwort, tansy, sometimes pennyroyal if we're being careful with the dose. It's part of what can be done. The fire crackles from inside the cottage, audible through the open door. Is that what you do, you ask? When women come to you for that? I'll answer your questions about what I do when you know enough to understand what you're asking. She moves to the next section of the Yarrow bed. Right now, you know the plant. Learn the plant completely first. What it looks like at every stage. What it smells like fresh and dried. What it tastes like. Yes, you need to taste it. Not now, this morning, but soon. What it does to a wound and why. How long it keeps when dried. What it won't do, which is as important as what it will. She cuts a long stem and holds it up. Yarrow won't hurt you if you use it wrong. That's almost unique. Most of the plants in this garden, used wrongly, will do something you don't want. Yarrow is the exception. Too little, and it does less than you wanted. Too much, and it does more. But it won't kill you and it won't damage you permanently. That's not something you can say about mugwort or tansy or wormwood or half the others we grow. She puts the stem in the basket. That's why we start with yarrow. By the time the sun is properly up, a thin, pale, early spring sun that provides light without warmth, as though it's still deciding whether to commit, you've cleared the yarrow beds, divided the comfrey, and moved to what Marjorie calls the apothecary section, the part of the garden closest to the house, protected on two sides by the cottage wall and the fence, slightly warmer than the open beds, slightly more sheltered from the wind. This is where the more sensitive plants live, where the ones that need careful conditions spend their winters huddled close to the warm stones. Hyssop, a woody little shrub with small dark leaves and in summer spikes of deep blue-purple flowers. It smells extraordinary, sharp, slightly minty, slightly bitter, with something underneath that is the smell of clean air somehow. Of the tops of hills. Marjorie uses it for the chest, makes a tea of the dried leaves and flowers that opens airways, soothes the irritation of a persistent cough. She uses the infused oil for bruises and swellings. She uses the dried leaf, added to the steam of a bowl of very hot water for a face tent. You sit over it with a cloth over your head and breathe the steam in, and it does something remarkable to a blocked nose, something immediate and almost violent in its effectiveness. You've had occasion to test this personally, in the 3rd week of your stay here, when you woke with a head cold so severe that your entire face felt pressurized and wrong. Marjorie prepared the hyssop steam bath with the same brisk efficiency she brings to everything and handed it to you without sympathy. You sat under the cloth and breathed until your eyes ran and your nose ran and something released, somewhere in your sinuses like a lock opening. "Better?" she asked when you emerged. "Yes," you said. "Good. The chopped root needs drying. You can do that this afternoon." The care she gives is always immediate and practical, and then immediately followed by more work. This is also something you're beginning to understand about this life. Lavender next, the most robust plant in the garden, the one that has colonized the entire western fence line and spreads its silver-grey arms in every direction. The smell, when you brush against it, is so strong it's almost physical, a presence rather than a scent. You breathe it in and something in your chest settles. Something in your shoulders drops half an inch. This is not imagination. There is something in lavender, in Lavandula angustifolia, that does something physiological to human stress response. Marjorie doesn't know the mechanism. Nobody in 1321 knows the mechanism. But she knows the effect because she's watched it happen in this garden for 30 years. "It's not just the smell," she says when you mention this. "The oil will make it in summer when the flower are just opening. The oil applied to the skin also does it. And in a wound it keeps things clean. I don't know why. I know that a wound dressed with lavender oil and kept covered heals faster and cleaner than a wound dressed with nothing. This is true. We know now why. Lavender oil has genuine antimicrobial properties, kills or inhibits the growth of certain bacteria on the wound surface." Marjorie doesn't know the word antimicrobial. She knows the outcome. This is how a lot of the knowledge in this garden works. The why is not yet known. The what is known. What it does, when to use it, how much. The why comes centuries later when someone with laboratory equipment finally takes the plants apart. You find yourself thinking about this a lot, about what it means to know something without knowing why you know it, about the particular epistemology of practical empirical knowledge accumulated over generations. This works, this doesn't, this dose is safe, this dose isn't, without the theoretical framework that would explain it. Marjorie lives entirely inside that empirical knowledge. She has no interest in the why. "The why is for scholars," she said once, when you asked why yarrow helped with fevers. "I'm not a scholar, I'm a healer." You're beginning to think this is a false distinction. But you have the wisdom at 17 to not say so. The first real lesson of the morning comes at the southernwood. Southernwood, Artemisia abrotanum, is a small woody shrub with finely divided grey-green leaves that have a smell so distinctive it lodges in memory like a thorn. Not unpleasant, not quite pleasant either. Something in between. Something that smells like it means business. It belongs to the Artemisia family. Named for Artemis, the Greek goddess associated with women, with the moon, with childbirth, and the aspects of female experience that happen outside the normal run of civic life. "This is not a coincidence," Marjorie explains, crouching to cut back the southernwood's winter-killed tips with scissors that are probably older than you are. "The whole family is women's herbs," she says. "Wormwood, mugwort, southernwood, tarragon, all of them have the same character. Bitter, strong, working on the same systems in the body. The old women who named things knew what they were doing when they called it Artemisia. What does southernwood do?" This one is milder than its relatives. The same effects but gentler. It regulates the monthly flow, brings it on if it's late, eases it if it's too heavy. It's also useful for intestinal worms, which is a less elegant use but an important one, especially in children. She clips a dead tip. The smell. You're smelling it now. You are. You are, in fact, breathing carefully through your nose because the smell of southernwood is particularly insistent. That smell is partly what does the work, Marjorie says. The volatile oils that make the smell are in the medicine. When you dry it, you want to preserve as much of that smell as possible, which means drying quickly, in shade, not in direct sun. Direct sun destroys the oils. She clips another tip. This is the rule for all the aromatic herbs. The smell is the medicine. Protect the smell. This is the kind of thing, the simple, practical, fundamental rule that explains 100 smaller decisions, that makes you reach for the mental equivalent of a pen, except you have no pen and no paper, so you repeat it to yourself instead. The smell is the medicine. Protect the smell. You will remember this 30 years from now when you have your own garden. By mid-morning you've reached the mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, the most common of the Artemisia family, the one that grows everywhere, not just in gardens, but in hedgerows and road edges and the margins of fields, anywhere there's disturbed ground and a bit of moisture. In the wild, it's a tall, rather coarse plant with deeply divided leaves that are dark green on top and silver white underneath, as though someone painted the backs of the leaves with chalk. The silver is the protective layer, tiny fine hairs that give it its distinctive shimmer. Hold a leaf up to the light and it's like holding something that can't quite decide if it belongs in the world. Marjorie's garden has a controlled stand of it in the corner which she manages carefully because, as you observed earlier, mugwort will spread by root if you let it. Left alone, it would eventually colonize half the garden. Before you touch it, Marjorie says, we're going to sit. She does something she almost never does. She pulls the three-legged stool out through the cottage door, sets it beside the bed and sits on it. She gestures to the ground beside her. You sit. The damp of the earth comes through your skirt immediately, but you're accustomed to cold and damp now in a way you weren't 6 weeks ago. Marjorie is quiet for a moment, looking at the mugwort. Its new growth is only a few inches high, small, bright green, ferny leaves pushing up through the dead stems of last year. It looks entirely harmless. Tell me what you know, she says. What you've heard? You think. People use it as a flavouring. In ale, before hops, people use mugwort to bitter the ale. Still do in some places. Yes. What else? It's a strewing herb. You dry it and scatter it on floors to discourage insects. And, you pause, the women's uses. Say it plainly. It brings on menstruation. It can be used if a woman's courses are delayed. A pause. It can be used to end a pregnancy in the early stages. Marjorie nods. This is the calm nod of a person who is not alarmed by factual information. Both of those things are true, she says. The first use, regulating the monthly flow, is simple and common and something most women know. A tea of dried mugwort, taken for several days when the courses are late. It works on the uterus directly, causing contractions. If there is nothing to expel, it simply regulates the cycle. If there is something to expel in the earlier stage, she pauses, it may be effective. It becomes less effective as time passes. It is also more dangerous as time passes. The wind picks up slightly, moving through the garden from the north. You pull your cloak tighter. I'm telling you this, Marjorie continues, because women will come to you with this need. Not all of them will say it plainly. Some will say their courses are late and let you draw your own conclusions. Some will say it explicitly. Some will be in distress and some will not be. And you need to know what you can offer and what you cannot. What can you offer? In the early stages, mugwort tea is the first approach. Gentle, not reliable enough to depend on. I'd say it works well in perhaps 2/3 of early cases. After that, if needed, a stronger preparation that combines mugwort with pennyroyal and sometimes tansy, all of which I'll show you and explain. The combination is more reliable. It is also more dangerous. She looks at you directly. You need to be honest with women about what dangerous means. It means there are risks to the womb, sometimes to life. The woman has to weigh those risks against what she knows about her own situation. Your job is not to make that choice for her. Your job is to give her the most accurate information possible so she can make the choice herself. You sit with this for a moment. The mugwort moves slightly in the wind. Does Father Edmund know you do this? You ask. A sound that might be a laugh. The closest thing to a laugh Marjorie produces in normal conversation. Father Edmund, she says carefully, knows that I am the woman this village comes to when medicine is needed. He has been here 4 years, and in those 4 years I have delivered 6 babies, and helped with 2 difficult labours, and treated injuries and fevers, and the winter sickness and the summer sickness, and Thomas the smith's infected hand, which would have taken the arm and possibly killed him if he'd waited another day. Father Edmund understands that the village needs what I do. A pause. Father Edmund does not ask specific questions. And if he did, then I would answer them as honestly as I could manage. She stands from the stool, which is not always the same as answering them completely. She picks up the small spade. Now, I'll show you how to manage the root spread, and then we'll talk about the difference between the leaf harvest and the flower harvest and the root, because all 3 have different properties, and all 3 are useful for different things. The morning passes in the way mornings pass when you're learning something real, too quickly, and with the constant background sensation of information going in faster than your mind can organise it, piling up in a rough heap that will have to be sorted through later. You work and listen and touch and smell and occasionally taste. Marjorie hands you things and says, "Taste this carefully on the tip of your tongue and tell me what you notice." And you store it all in the particular memory of the body, which is different from the memory of the mind and in some ways more reliable. You learn, by feel, the difference between fresh mugwort leaf and dried mugwort leaf. The fresh leaf is the more active medicine. The dried leaf for most preparations loses some potency but gains convenience, stability. The root is the strongest preparation, used in smaller doses with more care, for when the leaf preparation hasn't been sufficient. You learn that mugwort should never be used in pregnancy past the first weeks, which Marjorie states with the flat emphasis she reserves for things that have killed people when misunderstood. You learn that the preparation matters as much as the plant. A weak tea is one thing, a strong decoction of the root is another, and treating them interchangeably is how you injure someone. You learn that mugwort has a smell when fresh that is unlike its smell when dried. Fresh, it smells sage-like, herby, with an edge of something darker. Dried, it becomes earthier, more medicinal, less recognisably like a plant from the garden, and more like something from a medicine chest. You learn that it has been used in cultures across Europe and Asia and into the Arab medical tradition for so long that its history as a medicine predates written records entirely. That there are Roman sources mentioning it, Greek sources, Anglo-Saxon herbals. The 9th century Lacnunga, an Anglo-Saxon medical text that is currently, in the year 1321, about 400 years old and still cited. The 9 herbs charm in that text mentions mugwort first, above all the other herbs, which tells you something about how the people who knew plants thought about this one. Most important thing first. Around noon, someone comes. You hear the gate before you see anything, the particular creak of it, a creak you've come to distinguish from all other garden sounds, because it means someone has arrived for Marjorie and you need to be present and quiet and observant. A woman, young, younger than you by a year or two, which means 15 at most. She's dressed in the plain woolen clothing of a village family, better quality than the very poor, but not by much. Her name, you'll learn, is B, short for Beatrice. She's from a farm about a mile north of the village. She doesn't look distressed exactly. She looks like someone who has been frightened for several weeks and has finally made a decision and is now on the far side of the fear, in the flat place where you've committed and there's nothing left but to go through. Marjorie looks at her. One look, brief, the grey-green eyes making some assessment you can't track. "Come inside," she says. They go inside. You continue working in the garden. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to continue working. You're not supposed to listen. You're not present for this conversation. This is something Marjorie made clear early on. Some things that happen in this cottage you know about because you're here and the cottage is small and you can't help but know. Some things are not your knowledge yet, not until Marjorie decides they are. The line is drawn by her and you've learned to respect it, mostly because you've learned to respect the reasons for it. But you can hear the low murmur of voices through the open cottage door. You cannot hear the words and you do not try to. You pull the mugwort root runners with the careful, deliberate attention Marjorie showed you. The roots are long and thin, travelling underground 3 or 4 feet from the parent plant before sending up new shoots. Each runner is potential future mugwort. You sever it at both ends, add it to the pile that will be composted, press the soil back into place. The girl bee comes out of the cottage after perhaps 20 minutes. She looks different from when she went in. Still flat, still past the fear, but different. Something has happened to her face, something like relief, except relief that has cost something to arrive at. She doesn't speak to you. She goes out through the gate. Marjorie comes to the door. "Finish the mugwort runners," she says, "and then come inside. I need to prepare something and I want you to watch." Inside, the cottage, the kitchen end, if you can call it that. It's more a section of the single main room demarcated by the hearth and the shelves, is where Marjorie keeps her preparations. Not the plants themselves, which live in the garden or in dried bundles hanging from the beams. The preparations, the oils and tinctures and dried powders and processed roots that are the finished medicines. These shelves are extraordinary. You've spent 47 days cataloguing them mentally, and you're still not sure you've got everything identified. Pottery jars, mostly, of varying sizes, sealed with wax or linen or leather according to what's inside. Small wooden boxes, dried bundles, bottles, precious glass, 4 of them, reserved for the most volatile preparations where the seal matters most. Marjorie lifts down 3 jars and sets them on the work surface. A plank of dense, dark wood worn smooth by years of use. The girl is 3 or 4 weeks along, she says. She's certain. Her courses have been regular since she was 12 and they've stopped. You don't ask questions, you watch. Mugwort first. Dried leaf, not the root. Too strong at this stage, unnecessary. A tea prepared with the dried leaf and taken twice daily for 5 days. She opens the first jar. The smell rises immediately. Earthy, herby, darker than the fresh leaf. This much. She measures by the palm of her hand, transfers it to a smaller cloth packet. If that doesn't work, which with such an early stage it may well not, she opens the second jar. Pennyroyal. Pennyroyal. Menthopolegium. Another plant in the garden, one you've spent time with. A low, spreading mint relative with tiny leaves and a smell that's sharper than ordinary mint, almost harsh. The smell of it is, actually, what makes it effective as an insect repellent, which is its other primary traditional use. But its medical use for women is older than its use as a flea deterrent. Old enough that Roman writers mentioned it. Old enough that Hildegard of Bingen, 200 years before this conversation, wrote about it carefully. Pennyroyal is more reliable than mugwort for this purpose, Marjorie says, measuring carefully. Precisely. You notice that the measure for pennyroyal is smaller. It is also more dangerous. The dose that ends a pregnancy and the dose that does serious harm to the woman are not far apart. She puts the measured herb in a separate packet. This is the key thing. I'm giving her enough for the tea to be effective. I'm giving her explicit instruction on how to prepare it. I am also telling her what will happen if she takes more than this, and making sure she understands that more is not better. What does too much do? To the kidneys primarily, and the liver. Serious damage potentially. There are women who have died from pennyroyal. They didn't die from a measured therapeutic dose. They died from taking too much, or preparing it too strong, or using the essential oil directly. The oil is far more concentrated than the herb, and using even a small amount of the pure oil in the way you'd use the herb tea can be fatal. She seals the pennyroyal packet. Which is why she is not buying the pure oil. She's getting the dried herb with specific instructions. The third jar is tansy, Tanacetum vulgare. Also in the garden, a robust, cheerful-looking plant with button-like yellow flowers in summer. Finely divided leaves, a smell that's sharp and medicinal and slightly insect-like. Also an Artemisia family cousin. Also a medicine for intestinal worms and a flavouring, and a strewing herb and a women's herb with the same spectrum of uses and the same danger profile. Effective, and the line between effective and too much is one you must know precisely. The tansy I'm including as the third option. If the mugwort and pennyroyal are not sufficient, I'm leaving instructions for sequence. Start with mugwort, add pennyroyal if needed, tansy only if still nothing after a week. I'm not giving the tansy yet. I'll send it with Thomas's mother when he next goes past her farm. Why not give it all at once? Because if I give it all at once, there's a chance she uses all of it together at once, which is not what I'm instructing, but fear does things to judgment, and 5 weeks from now she might be frightened and desperate, and decide that more and faster is better. I'm managing the risk by managing the delivery. A pause. You have to think about this. Not just what you're giving and why, how you're giving it, and what could go wrong, and how you structure the giving to minimize what can go wrong. This is the part of the knowledge that is not in any herbal. That is not written down anywhere. The management, the human context, the specific, situated intelligence of knowing not just the plant but the person, and the circumstances and the ways that fear and desperation can corrupt the best laid plans. Marjorie writes a note, or rather draws a note, a series of small pictures indicating the sequence and approximate amount, because she doesn't know if B can read, and she's not going to ask in a way that might embarrass. A small drawing of a cup, a dried leaf, the sun indicating morning and evening, the number of days. Simple enough to understand without words. When she leaves here, Marjorie says, she has what she needs. If something goes wrong, if there is too much bleeding, if she develops a fever, if there is pain beyond what I've told her to expect, she comes back. Immediately, not in 2 days. Immediately. What are the signs that something is going wrong? Marjorie lists them. You memorize them. You memorize them with the particular permanent quality of information that you know in some deep part of yourself that you will need. The afternoon is different in quality from the morning. The sun has moved, the light is more golden now, and you're in a different part of the garden. The south-facing wall where the plants that need more heat are growing, where the valerian is, Valeriana officinalis, tall, stately, with clusters of tiny pale pink flowers in summer and a root that is one of the strangest smelling things in existence. The dried root smells to modern noses like dirty socks and earth and something slightly unpleasant. To medieval noses, apparently, it smelled like desirability. Some sources suggest the dried root was used as a perfume, which means either their aesthetic of smell was very different from ours, or the plant was valued enough that people rationalized the smell as appealing. The Latin name Valeriana comes from either valere, to be strong, to be healthy, or from the Roman province of Valeria. Both interpretations fit. What valerian does, reliably and consistently, is reduce anxiety and promote sleep. The mechanism, that it acts on GABA receptors in the brain similar to but less powerfully than pharmaceutical anxiolytics, is unknown to Marjorie naturally. What is known to her through direct observation over 30 years is the outcome. A person who drinks a valerian root tea an hour before bed will sleep. Not always easily, not always deeply, but they will sleep. And a person in acute anxiety, given valerian, will calm. This is the most asked for thing I make, Marjorie says, pulling a dried root bundle from the shelf and setting it on the work surface for you to examine. Winter especially, people can't sleep. The cold, the darkness, the worry, illness, hunger, whether the harvest will come back up. Winter is hard on the mind, and when the mind isn't resting, the body gets worse. You pick up the dried root, hold it. The smell is extraordinary. Not unpleasant to you, actually. After weeks in this cottage, you've reorganized your sense of smell entirely, and now what smells like medicine smells like safety. The root is dark brown, fibrous, with a dense, heavy quality. How do you prepare it? Decoction, not infusion. The roots need to boil, a gentle simmer for 20 minutes, to release the active matter. You can't just pour hot water over them. You need sustained heat. She takes the root back, adds it to a small pot already on the fire. I always have this going in winter. People come in distress and I give them a cup and they sit by the fire, and by the time the cup is done, usually, something has shifted. This strikes you. Not just the medicine, the combination, the fire, the sitting, the cup, the warmth, the attention of being in a safe place with someone competent. How much of what Marjorie does is the plants, and how much is all of this structure she creates around the plants? Both, she says when you ask. The plants work. Don't let anyone tell you they don't. I've seen them work clearly enough that I'd stake my life on it, and I have, several times. But the plant works better in the right container. A person who feels safe and attended to heals faster than a person who is alone and frightened. This is as true as yarrow stops bleeding. Toward late afternoon, when the light is getting long and golden, and the cold is coming back into the air with the particular sharpness of an English spring evening, you're working in the far corner of the garden, the part nearest the hedge, where Marjorie grows what she calls the heavy plants, wolfsbane. You've known this one was here since the first week. Marjorie showed it to you on your second day, before she showed you almost anything else, and said, "This is the one thing in this garden that can kill you reliably and quickly. Don't touch it without gloves. Don't touch it at all today." Aconitum napellus, monk's hood. The hooded blue-purple flowers that will appear in summer look innocent, beautiful even, the way many deadly things look beautiful, as though the poison and the beauty are the same impulse expressed differently. Every part of the plant is toxic, the root most of all. Aconitine, the active compound, is one of the most rapidly acting plant poisons known. Absorbed through skin, through mucous membranes, through cuts, it causes immediate tingling, then numbness, then disruption of heart rhythm. In sufficient dose, cardiac arrest. Does anyone use it medicinally, you ask? You've put on the old gloves Marjorie keeps hanging by the gate. Leather, well worn, too large for your hands but functional. Very carefully, Marjorie says from the safe side of the path. She's watching you work, not touching it herself today. Very small doses, for severe pain, the kind of nerve pain that nothing else touches, the kind that someone gets from injuries to the spine or certain kinds of joint disease. In tiny amounts, the same property that makes it fatal in large amounts can deaden pain. But the margin is so small that I've never used it that way myself. The risk of getting it wrong is too high. Pause. There are women I've heard of, not here in the north in Yorkshire, who knew the exact dose, passed down, specific. I don't have that knowledge, and I won't pretend to. So why do you grow it? Because someone might bring me a case I can't manage with what I know, and I want it to be here, properly controlled and identified, rather than growing wild somewhere a child might pull it, thinking it was something else. You carefully cut away the dead winter growth from the base of the monk's hood. The gloves are uncomfortable, stiff and poorly fitting, but you're not going to take them off. Your hands are sweating inside the leather. Also, Marjorie says more quietly, because there are things that happen in this world that regular medicine can't solve. I've had women come to me who are past medicine's help, whose pain was not going to end otherwise, and I needed to know it was there. She says this in a tone that closes the conversation. You don't ask any further questions. You understand what she means. You wish you didn't quite understand it as clearly as you do. Foxglove, growing along the north wall in the shadier, cooler area it prefers, in its first year, which is where these are. Second year foxglove produces the tall flower spikes, the dramatic purple-pink bells that you'll see in summer. First year foxglove is just a rosette, a flat, low cushion of large, soft, slightly furry leaves lying close to the ground. Digitalis purpurea. What do you use it for, you ask? You actually don't know this one well. The heart, Marjorie says. People whose hearts beat wrongly, too fast or with an irregular rhythm, the kind that you can feel fluttering when you press your fingers to someone's wrist. The leaf, prepared correctly, slows and regularizes the heartbeat. But, and here she uses the tone that means there is a very large but coming. The dose that helps and the dose that harms are extremely close together. Foxglove is slower acting than wolfsbane, but in its way just as dangerous. too much and the heart slows too far, or goes into a wrong rhythm of its own. She crouches to examine the rosettes. I use it rarely, specific cases only, where I'm confident of the diagnosis and the preparation. And I always tell whoever I give it to exactly what symptoms to watch for that mean they've had too much. What symptoms? Nausea first, then a kind of yellowing at the edge of vision. Things look slightly yellow. Then, if they've gone too far, the heartbeat itself changes in a way they'll feel. At that point, stop immediately. Come to me. She touches one of the broad leaves, lightly, with her fingertip. People have been using foxglove for probably 1,000 years. We know it works. We know it can kill. The knowledge of exactly how to use it safely is what separates a healer from an accident. What Marjorie doesn't know, can't know, is that in 1785 a physician named William Withering will publish the first scientific account of digitalis. We'll study it systematically. We'll describe the cardiac glycosides it contains. We'll give it its first truly reliable medical legitimacy. But the women before Withering knew, not in his language, not in his framework, but they knew. Evening arrives with the smell of wood smoke from 6 cottages. You're back inside by the fire, eating. Bread and the remains of the morning's pottage and some dried apple that has been reconstituting in water all afternoon and is now sweet and soft and the closest thing to luxury this cottage offers. You eat slowly, which is something you've learned here. Marjorie eats slowly, deliberately, paying attention to her food, and it's contagious. The day's work has settled into your body as a pleasant exhaustion. Your hands ache less than usual. The calendar poultice is working slowly on the crack in your thumb. Your back aches in the specific way of someone who's been crouching and kneeling and digging all day, which is a working ache, not a worrying one. The garden will be different in a week, Marjorie says. She's mending something, a section of linen, some piece of domestic work that exists in the gaps between all the other work. You'll see things you haven't seen before. The plants move quickly in spring once they decide to move. How long until the first harvests? Chamomile will be earliest. The flowers open in May. Calendula, same time. Those are your beginners' harvests. They're the most forgiving, the widest margin for error, the most gentle medicines. She makes a small, precise stitch. By June you'll have everything opening at once, and you'll wish time moved more slowly. What about the roots? The Valerian harvest. October. Roots are best after the first frost. The plant has put everything back down into the root at that point. The aerial parts are spent. She looks at you over the mending. You have a good memory. My mother always said so. I know. She said so to me too. A pause. You're faster than she was at this. Not better. Faster. There's a difference. She was more thorough. You're sometimes in too much of a hurry to understand something completely. You feel the slight sting of this, which is probably intentional. Is that a problem? Only if you let it be. She returns to the mending. The remedy is to slow down deliberately, not because you can't do it fast, because the plant doesn't care that you can. The plant has its own time. 3 weeks later, and this is important because things are about to change, a different kind of patient arrives. Not a young woman with a personal need, not a farmer's child with a wound or a cough, not one of the usual, a man. He arrives in the late afternoon, when the garden has been worked and the preparations for the day are done, and you're grinding dried rose hips with the stone mortar that takes up a corner of the work table. He comes to the gate and stops there. He is well dressed for this village. Not lordly, but good wool, clean, a hat of the kind that indicates someone with some standing. He's perhaps 45. His face is grey, not just pale, genuinely grey, with a particular colour of someone whose heart is not moving blood efficiently. His name is Robert Alderton. He's the reeve of the manor, the local estate manager, the man who stands between the lord's interests and the village's survival. A significant person. He comes to Marjorie because he has had no choice. The physician from the market town 3 miles away has visited 3 times and charged 3 times, and left each time with an explanation about humours and an instruction to rest and a remedy that has done nothing visible. Robert Alderton is still grey and still short of breath on exertion, and still feeling the fluttering irregularity at his wrist that he describes, sitting on Marjorie's stool, as like a bird caught in a sack. Marjorie listens. She asks questions. Not many, but specific. How long? Whether there's pain with the fluttering or just the flutter itself. Whether lying down is different from standing. Whether he's noticed anything that makes it worse. Anything that makes it better. Does he sleep? Badly, he says. Food? Is there anything that changes it? A pause. Salt. More salt seems to make it worse. I've noticed that. Marjorie nods. She makes no promises. She says, "There is something I can try. It will not work immediately. It takes several weeks to know whether it's working. You'll come back to me in 1 week and then in 3 weeks and tell me everything you notice. If anything feels wrong, worse than it does now in any way, you come back before the week is up, immediately." Robert Alderton nods. He has the expression of a man who is not accustomed to being in a position of need and is managing the discomfort of it with dignity. "What will you give me?" "A preparation of foxglove leaf," Marjorie says, "and also hawthorn, which is gentler, which I'll have you start with first for 2 days before you add the foxglove, and valerian for a sleep, separately, not combined with the others." She prepares it while he watches, carefully, precisely. The dried foxglove leaf measured by the spoon she reserves for this purpose specifically, a spoon that is smaller than her regular measuring spoons, a distinction that matters. You grind rose hips and watch, and store it all in the permanent memory of the body. After Alderton leaves, Marjorie sits in her chair by the fire for a moment. "Will it work?" you ask. "I think so. I've seen this presentation before. The pattern of symptoms, the progression. The foxglove usually works for this pattern." A pause. "Whether he'll do as I say and stop if anything changes, and come back in a week, that I don't know. Men of his position are not used to following other people's instructions. What if he doesn't? Then we'll find out what happens when someone doesn't. Follow instructions," she stands. That's also knowledge, unfortunately. A month later, early June. The garden has transformed. This is the word for it. Transformed. In the space of 6 weeks since that cold grey April morning, everything has moved with a speed that still surprises you despite having watched it happen. The comfrey is enormous. Great rough-furred leaves as large as your forearm, the flower spikes beginning to open into the drooping purple bells that are the plant's signature. The yarrow beds are full and ferny, the first white flower heads just appearing. Lavender bushes that were bare twigs in March are now dense silver-green mounds. The hyssop has come into its deep blue flower. The valerian has sent up stalks that will reach 5 feet by July, topped with clouds of pale pink flowers that smell sweet and slightly strange. Everything smells. This is the morning garden now, a concentrated, layered, complex smell that hits you when you open the gate at dawn with the force of something physical, lavender and hyssop, and the green sharpness of yarrow and the deep earthiness of comfrey, and under it all the always present English morning smell of damp soil and cold air. You've become different inside this garden over these weeks. Your hands move differently. They know things. They know the difference between a yarrow leaf ready for harvest and a yarrow leaf 3 days past its best. They know the weight of a chamomile flower head at exactly the right moment. There is a point just as the white petals begin to reflexively bend backward from the yellow centre, when the potency is highest. You can feel the difference. This is the knowledge Marjorie said lived in hands. You're beginning to understand what that means from the inside. Chamomile first this morning. The flowers are at the right stage. You walk the rows on your knees, a shallow basket carried in one arm, picking methodically. The rule is, pick the flower when it's at the precise stage of the petals turning back, not before, when it looks perfect but the chemistry hasn't peaked, not after, when it's gone over. The smell of chamomile, Matricaria chamomilla, the common chamomile, the one that smells like apple and honey and warm grass, is overwhelming when you're moving through a full bed of it in flower. It gets on your hands and stays there all day. It gets in your hair. By evening, after a day of chamomile harvest, you smell like a chamomile tea. This is not a complaint. The medicinal uses of chamomile are the most immediately legible of any plant Marjorie grows. Almost everyone knows them intuitively. The tea for sleep, for stomach pain, for the cramps of difficult menstruation, for calming an upset child. What most people don't know is the precision with which Marjorie uses it. The specific preparation for different conditions, the difference between a gentle infusion for general relaxation and a strong double infusion for acute stomach spasm, the topical use of the oil for skin inflammation. There is something in chamomile, acetylene, the intensely blue compound produced when chamomile is steam distilled into oil, that is one of the most remarkable natural anti-inflammatories known. Marjorie can't name it, but she uses its effect with precision. The oil is different from the tea, she explains, joining you in the chamomile bed, her hands moving automatically. For the skin, burns, rashes, the dry angry patches some people get on their elbows and faces in winter, the oil is what you want. The tea for the inside, the oil for the outside. She picks a flower. We'll distill some of this later in summer. I'll show you how. Distillation, the simple apparatus of pot and tube and collecting vessel that produces the essential oils, is one of the more technical pieces of knowledge in Marjorie's repertoire. It came to her, she said once, from a manuscript she read at a monastery. A monk who had learned it from an Arabic source, part of the great transmission of Islamic medical knowledge into Europe that happened through the school of Salerno and through translation centres in Spain and Sicily. The Arab chemists were the masters of distillation. This knowledge has been travelling northward for 200 years by the time it reaches Marjorie's cottage in Derbyshire. The world is larger than it looks from this garden. In the middle of June, something happens that is not a crisis, but is the shadow of one. The shadow that tells you a crisis is somewhere on the road. A girl from the neighbouring village comes, not B, a different girl, older, 17, and she has not come for the reason you expect. She has come to say that B's mother is ill, that she's been ill for 3 weeks, that the illness started with a fever and has not lifted, that she's asking Marjorie to come. Marjorie goes. You go with her. This is the first time you've left the village in 6 weeks, the first time you've seen the world outside the garden and the cottage and the rhythm of Marjorie's work. Walking through the lanes between the two villages in the long green light of a June morning, the fields on either side full of rye and barley, just beginning to tighten toward harvest. It's strange to see distance again. Strange to feel the size of the world. Marjorie walks quickly, despite the hip, her bag over one shoulder. She doesn't speak during the walk. She's doing something in her head. You've come to recognize this. The slight inward quality to her eyes that means she's running through something. Preparing. Bee's mother Alice is in bed. She's a woman of perhaps 40 who looks 60. The fever, 3 weeks sustained, has done something to her face, dried it out, thinned it, pulled the skin tight. She is conscious, barely. Her breathing is shallow. Her skin is hot to the touch, but she's also shivering. Marjorie examines her. Hands, wrists, tongue, the whites of her eyes. A smell that she makes you identify. The particular smell of someone running a sustained fever. A dry, slightly sweet, slightly sour smell that is the smell of a body burning through its reserves. How long since she's had water? Marjorie asks Bee. She won't drink. She says it hurts. Throat? Yes, and swallowing. Marjorie looks at the throat. Willow bark first. I'll prepare it immediately, says for the fever. She needs to swallow something, even if it hurts. Then meadowsweet. I've got dried flowers in the bag. To help it stay down. A pause. And echinacea, which I don't have enough of. Do you know if anyone in this village grows it? Echinacea. Echinacea purpurea. The purple coneflower, native originally to North America but arriving in European gardens earlier than most people think, through trade routes you wouldn't expect. Marjorie has a small plant, 2 years established. She hasn't harvested it this year because it's still building root mass. She'll need it sooner. Someone in the north end grows something similar, Bee says. I don't know what it is. Show me quickly. It's the same plant. It was. The woman who grew it, an older woman, widow of a travelling merchant, had received the seeds from somewhere further south, from a trade connection she no longer remembered the origin of. She gives Marjorie everything she has. The dried roots from last year's harvest. A good amount. You spend the rest of the morning and the early afternoon in Bee's mother's cottage preparing and administering. Willow bark decoction for the fever, which Marjorie makes with the portable equipment she carries. A small clay pot, a fire starter, a measure. The patient takes it swallowed in small sips over an hour. The fever doesn't break immediately, but it drops. Not far, not to normal, but the shivering eases. Meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, the meadow queen, the herb that smells like honey and almonds, and that contains compounds related to the ones William Willow bark, will eventually be synthesized into by a pharmaceutical company, who will call the result aspirin. Again, the mechanism unknown. The outcome observed for centuries. Echinacea root decoction for the immune response. Marjorie gives instructions, precise as always, for how to continue over the next week. She needs to stay in bed. She needs to drink. I don't care if it hurts. She takes a spoonful every quarter hour. She needs someone in this room every night, not just checking on her. Someone actually present. Bee nods. She looks less frightened than you expected. She's someone who manages by having things to do. Having things to do is apparently an inherited quality. On the walk back, Marjorie says, she'll recover. How can you tell? The fever hasn't broken her. 3 weeks of fever, she's still conscious, still responding. If she was going to die from this, she'd be further gone by now. Her body's been fighting it and winning, just slowly. A pause. But if the willow bark and the rest don't hold the fever back enough for her to drink, she could still lose the recovery. Dehydration finishes people that the fever hasn't. The echinacea, does it really work? The woman I had it from says her husband brought it back from a journey south and told her the indigenous peoples of wherever it came from used it as their first defense against infection. She's used it herself 3 times for severe illnesses, and all 3 times the illness resolved faster than similar illnesses had before. A pause. That's not a trial. That's observation. But observation is where knowledge starts. The elevated view. It comes on a Sunday in July, unexpectedly, as the best things often do. Marjorie sends you to gather St. John's wort. Not from the garden. St. John's wort grows wild on the hillside north of the village, and the wild gathered plant is available in quantity that her garden patch can't match. The flowers are at peak, deep yellow, 5-petaled, with a distinctive smell when you crush them between your fingers. A smell like warm resin, like old honey, like sunlight made into a scent. The hillside is 1/2 mile walk through the village and out the other side, up the path that leads to the common grazing land. You've been up this way twice before, but in winter, in grey weather. Now in July, in the long warmth of a proper summer morning. You stop when you reach the crest. England. Below you. The whole of it, or the piece of it that is yours to see. The village with its dozen structures, the church with its small square tower, the mill by the stream, the fields running out in their long strips from the common boundaries, the hedgerows and the lanes. And beyond the village, the valley opening out, more fields, more green, the river catching the light. To the south, the hills at the beginning of the Peak District. To the north, the flatter land running toward the blue haze of distance. In your whole life until this year, you have not been further than 10 miles from the village where you were born. The world from the level of the lane is immediate and bounded. From here, it opens. You can see so much. The scale of it hits you somewhere below the chest. You sit in the long grass at the top of the hill and look, and keep looking. The St. John's wort surrounds you. It's everywhere on this hillside, the yellow flowers making the whole slope golden in the morning light. Hypericum perforatum. The perforatum, because if you hold a leaf up to the sun, you can see the oil glands through it. Tiny translucent dots that look like perforations. Those oil glands are where the medicine lives. The red-coloured infused oil made by packing the flowers into olive oil and leaving them in the sun for 6 weeks takes its colour from the hypericin in those glands. The compound that modern research will eventually confirm has genuine antidepressant properties, genuine antiviral properties, and genuine wound healing, properties applied topically. Marjorie uses it primarily for nerve pain and for mood, for the persistent grey flatness that some people experience, especially in winter, the feeling that is not exactly sadness, but a kind of draining of everything bright. She calls it the winter shadow. She gives them St. John's wort oil in small doses taken internally through the darkest months. We call it seasonal affective disorder now. She called it the winter shadow. The plant that helps in both cases is the same. You sit on the hillside and look at the world below you and think about what this year has taught you. Not just the plants, not just the medicinal properties of 40 different species, which you can now recite the way you once recited prayers. Something larger. Something about what it means to be the person in a community who carries knowledge, what it costs, what it means. Marjorie carries it with a particular kind of weight that you've been watching and trying to understand. It's not the weight of importance. She doesn't seem to find it important exactly in the sense of being proud of it or proprietary about it. It's the weight of responsibility. People need what she knows. She is the only one who can give it. That's not power, not exactly. It's something more like obligation, and the obligation is complicated, because what she knows includes things that the church finds uncomfortable. Not openly suspicious. Father Edmund is too careful for that, and Marjorie is too valuable for any sensible priest to push, but uncomfortable. The gap between what Marjorie can do and what the church says should be done about illness and fertility is a gap full of tension that everybody manages by not looking at it directly. You think about what Marjorie said that first morning. The knowledge, once you have it, changes you, changes what people expect of you. You understand that now from the inside. You have only 6 months of this knowledge, and already you can feel it, changing the way people in the village look at you. Not like Marjorie. You're nowhere near Marjorie, but you can see the beginning of it. The way Thomas's mother last week asked you about her daughter's chest cough before she asked Marjorie. The way you answered, accurately, and she went away with what she needed. The way that felt. The weight of it is different from what you expected. It doesn't feel heavy yet. It feels like something worth carrying. You start gathering St. John's wort. The flowers come off easily, the petals bright in your hand, staining your fingers slightly yellow from the pollen. The smell intensifies when you gather a handful, that warm, resinous, sunny smell. You fill the basket slowly and methodically, the way Marjorie has trained you, not stripping a single plant but taking from many, leaving enough to seed. The plant needs to come back. The plant needs to still be here next year. The smell is the medicine. Protect the smell. The plant has its own time. By the time you start back down the hill, the sun is higher and the village looks, from this angle, like a small and beautiful thing, small enough to hold in your cupped hands. You've been here 6 months and it's starting to feel like it might be home. September. The crisis, when it finally comes, does not come from where you've been watching. You have been, both of you, Marjorie and you, watching the direction of the church. Father Edmund has been making comments, small comments, carefully framed, about the nature of women's knowledge and the importance of spiritual guidance in matters of the body. He has said nothing specific. He has said nothing that could be pointed to and called an accusation. But the direction of travel is visible. What actually happens is different. A child, 7 years old, John, son of William the carpenter, he ate something in the wood. Berries, he said, from a shrub he didn't recognise. He is, by the time his mother carries him to the cottage, already convulsing. Marjorie takes one look and says, "Deadly nightshade. How long ago?" His mother doesn't know. An hour, maybe more. Belladonna. Atropa belladonna. Another plant in Marjorie's garden, another controlled, dangerous thing, growing in the corner near the wolfsbane. She grows it for the same reason she grows the wolfsbane, because it's useful in tiny amounts, because it needs to be in the right hands, because she'd rather have it here than have children find it in the wild without any adult who knows what it is. The poisoning from belladonna, the atropine alkaloids acting on the nervous system, dilating the pupils, disrupting heart rhythm, causing the convulsions and the fever and the terrifying hallucinations, is something Marjorie has seen twice before. Both times as cases presenting to her after the fact. Both times she's had limited tools. Salt water, she says, already moving, already thinking. We need to get as much of it out as possible, then I'll Need the charcoal from last night's fire. Activated charcoal, the concept of it, the practice of using carbon to bind poisons in the gut, is not well understood in 1321, but it is known empirically. Marjorie learned it from the same battered manuscript that gave her the distillation instructions, which got it from an Arab medical source. Grind the charcoal fine, mix with water, have the patient drink it. The charcoal binds to the poison in the gut before it can be fully absorbed. It doesn't reverse what's already been absorbed, but it limits how much more gets in. You're grinding charcoal with the stone mortar. Your hands are shaking slightly. You focus on the grinding, on making it fine, on making it as fine as possible, as fast as possible. The child is still convulsing. His mother is holding him. His eyes are open and completely wrong. The pupils enormously dilated, the irises almost invisible, the eyes dark and blank and looking at something that isn't in the room. The hallucinations are real to him. Whatever he's seeing is real. Marjorie is holding his head, talking to him. Not words, sounds, low, steady, rhythmic sounds. Not quite singing. Something below singing. Something that works on a frequency the conscious mind doesn't need to process. The convulsion passes after 2 minutes. The next one is milder. By the time you have the charcoal ready, the child is still. Pale and sweating and completely wrong in the eyes, but still. Hold his head, Marjorie says. Support it. You take her position. His head is hot in your hands. He's looking at you and through you, and at something behind you that you can't see. His lips are moving. In, Marjorie says, and pours the charcoal water into his mouth, and you hold the head, and he swallows. Again. The process takes an hour. The convulsions recur twice more, milder each time, the charcoal mixture twice more, water to stay hydrated, nothing else. There is nothing else you can do except support the body's own effort to process what it's been given. His mother doesn't speak during this hour. She makes no sound at all. You've never seen someone so completely still. When the child finally sleeps, a deep, heavy sleep that looks, to the untrained eye, potentially like something worse, Marjorie says to the mother, "He'll wake from this. The worst is over. He'll sleep heavily for many hours. When he wakes, he'll be confused, and he may still have some of the blank eyes, and he'll be frightened. Stay with him. Don't leave him alone." The mother looks at her with an expression that takes you a moment to identify. It's gratitude, but it's also something else. It's the expression of someone who has seen a thing that will take a long time to fully process, who has been in a room where knowledge made a difference between two outcomes, and who knows, down in the bone, that without this woman and this knowledge and this specific preparation of charcoal in the right amount at the right time, the outcome would have been the other one. She doesn't say any of this. She takes Marjorie's hands, holds them. Marjorie lets her. Walking home, in the late afternoon, when the village is golden with September light, and the fields are stubble now after the harvest. Walking home, you and Marjorie, in silence. You're shaking slightly. You notice this from the outside, as a fact about your body, the way you've learned to observe your own physical state. "You did well," Marjorie says. "I ground charcoal." You ground it quickly, you kept your hand steady, you did your part of what needed doing. A pause. That's not nothing. A longer pause. "It's going to be like this sometimes," she says. "Most of what we do is slow. The garden, the preparations, the consultations, the teaching. Most of it is a long, gradual accumulation of careful knowledge. And then sometimes it's a child convulsing on a table and you have 15 minutes to matter. Does it get easier to hold both at once? Marjorie's quiet for a moment. You get better at remembering that they're both the same work, that the slow part makes the fast part possible. She stops at her gate. The boy will be fine. How are you certain? Because I've seen this before and I know what the body does with it when the progression is interrupted early enough. Because I've seen the alternative when it isn't, and that looked different. She opens the gate. Experience is how you tell the difference. You don't have it yet. Asking me is the correct response. October. The roots. This is the harvest you've been waiting for without quite knowing you were waiting for it. Valerian, lifted from the earth in the weeks after the first frost. The roots come out dark and heavy and wet, and the smell, that extraordinary, specific, impossible to forget smell, hits you with the force of familiarity now. You know this smell. It's part of your year now, part of your internal calendar. You're digging. Alongside Marjorie, the two small spades working in rhythm, lifting each root carefully from the loosened soil, shaking the earth from them, setting them in the basket. The cold of the October earth seeps through your gloves, and your fingers are stiff within the first half hour. When I'm done here, Marjorie says, without looking up from digging, this garden won't stop. You understand that? A pause. Yes, you say. The knowledge doesn't stop when the person carrying it stops. It has to move somewhere. That's the only way it survives. She lifts a particularly large root, examines it, sets it in the basket. My teacher's teacher had this garden before my teacher. My teacher expanded it. I've expanded it further. When I'm gone, not soon, but eventually, you'll expand it further than I have. Because you'll learn things I don't know. Because knowledge doesn't stay still. What things don't you know? The question comes out before you can shape it more carefully, but Marjorie doesn't take offence. I don't know enough about the internal workings of what happens during illness. I know the symptoms and I know what helps them, but I don't know the mechanism, why fever breaks the way it does, what is actually happening in a wound when it heals or fails to heal. The Arab physicians know more about this than I do. The monastery at Lichfield has a library with texts I've never been able to access because they don't lend to women, she digs. I don't know enough about the plants of other countries, the things that might grow in the warm south that we don't have here, the medicinal knowledge of other traditions. I know what's come to me through the manuscripts Marjorie's predecessor had. That's a narrow window. What would you do if you could read everything? A silence. I would be more dangerous than I am, she says, eventually, and more useful. She stands, stretches the hip with a particular careful movement you've come to know. The limit of my knowledge has always been what I can get my hands on. The plants, the people who'll teach me, the manuscripts I can access. You might have more access than I did. The world is changing, not quickly, not in ways most people notice from day to day, but it's changing. More texts, more exchange. The knowledge is getting wider. She looks at you. Stay curious. After I'm done teaching you, stay curious. Keep looking for what you don't know yet. The garden will grow, but only if you keep planting things. Winter. The garden is asleep, or not asleep, retreated, pulled back into the roots, waiting. The beds are covered with dead leaves and straw against the deepest cold. The bundles hanging from the beams are this year's harvest, different in smell from last year's harvest because of differences in when things were picked, how they were dried, what the summer weather did to the plants. You know those differences now. You can smell them. You sleep on the pallet in the corner, which is warmer than it was last winter because you know now to stuff fresh straw into the ticking before the cold comes in earnest. You eat Marjorie's pottage in the mornings and work through the preparation she needs made. The valerian root decoctions, the chamomile oils, the dried herb packets for the people who come through the winter with coughs and fevers and injuries and the particular soul weight that winter imposes. People come steadily through December and January. The cold brings more need, not less. The harvest was not bad but not generous, and there are families eating less than they should, and the cold compounds everything. The respiratory illnesses, the joint pain, the mental fog of darkness and insufficient food. Marjorie is not an inexhaustible resource. You've come to understand this. She's a person of 53 who works 16-hour days and has been doing it for decades. And some evenings by the fire she has the look of someone running on reserves, not empty. She's not a person who shows exhaustion readily, but deep into reserves. On those evenings you make the valerian tea. You put it in front of her without comment. She takes it without comment. She sleeps some of those nights. Before the fire goes out, you keep it going. The accusation, when it finally comes, is nothing like you expected. You expected Father Edmund. You expected a formal challenge, a confrontation, something you could see coming. Instead, it comes sideways, the way most of the dangerous things do. A woman from outside the village, you don't know her, has had a miscarriage. This is not unusual. Miscarriages are common in this time and place, for reasons that include nutrition and the difficulty of pregnancy under conditions of chronic physical labour. They happen, and they are mourned, and they are absorbed, mostly, into the texture of a hard life. What is not usual is that this woman, in her grief and in her need for something to blame, has said to someone, who said it to someone who said it to someone, that the miscarriage came after she took something she got from a woman who learned her herbs from Marjorie Brant. That someone eventually reached Father Edmund. He comes on a Wednesday morning in February, alone, which is a good sign. If he'd brought the church wardens, it would be different. He sits in the chair you put out for him. He accepts the cup of ale you bring, which is also a good sign. He's nervous. His hands give it away. He says, "There have been reports." Marjorie says, "There are always reports." Reports specifically about medicines given for women's conditions that may have caused harm. A long pause. Marjorie says, "What medicines?" Father Edmund doesn't actually know. This is clear. He's repeating something he's been told without the specifics, and the specifics are where the devil lives, and without the specifics there's no actual accusation. There's just a story that went through 4 people before it got to him. The miscarriage would have happened regardless, Marjorie says. The woman had been unwell for weeks before she came to me. She was carrying a pregnancy that was not viable. I gave her nothing to cause the miscarriage. I gave her medicines to manage the aftermath, to prevent infection, to manage pain, to help her sleep. Those medicines are the same medicines I'd give to any woman in similar circumstances. Father Edmund looks at her. "You're certain," he says. "I'm certain about what I gave her. The miscarriage happened because the pregnancy was not viable. If she wants to believe otherwise because grief requires a cause, I understand that. But I won't accept responsibility for something I didn't cause." Another long pause. Father Edmund says, "I will need to trust your judgment in this matter." "Yes," Marjorie says, "you will." She says it without apology and without softness. The facts as she understands them stated plainly, and the necessary conclusion from those facts. He leaves. The ale is barely touched. After he goes, Marjorie stands at the window for a moment looking at the grey February garden. Was that, you start. Over? She turns. For now. These things come back. They always come back. The knowledge we carry makes us necessary, and it also makes us targets. Both of those things are true at the same time, and that's the situation you're choosing if you choose this life. She looks at you directly, the grey-green eyes steady. You're choosing it, she says. I can see that you are. I want to make sure you know what you're choosing. I know. Tell me. You think about the year, about Bee's mother and her sustained fever, about the boy with the belladonna poisoning and your hands holding his head, about Robert Alderton with his grey face and his fluttering heart, who came back 4 weeks after the first visit and looked, for the first time, like a man with blood moving properly through him, about the girl Bee who came back in November, with seeds from her mother's garden as a gift, who looked at you with recognition, as if she'd always known you'd be here. I'm choosing the garden, you say, and everything that comes with it. Marjorie nods, just once. Good, she says. Come and help me with the comfrey root. Spring again. A year since you came. The wheel has turned and brought you back to the beginning, except you're not at the beginning anymore. The yarrow is already green. You don't need to be told this. You can see it. You've been watching for it. You can smell when the garden is waking up. You open the gate on the 1st of April and the smell hits you. Cold earth, the faint green beginning of things, the promise of everything that will come. Your hands know what to do. They're different hands than the ones you arrived with. They have calluses in the right places now. They know the weight of a spade and the grip of a garden basket. The crack in your thumb healed in November and hasn't come back. Your palms are brown despite the season. Marjorie is behind you, through the cottage door, already at the fire, already preparing. You think about what she said. Knowledge doesn't stay still. Keep planting things. You think about what you know now. Yarrow. Stops bleeding, breaks fever, regulates the monthly flow, grows everywhere and spreads everywhere and keeps, dried, for up to 2 years. Smells like summer meadows compressed. Comfrey. Knits broken things, soothes inflamed airways, comes back from any root fragment you leave in the ground, never gives up, never fully dies, mugwort. Carries the oldest knowledge and the most legally and socially dangerous knowledge, grows quietly in corners, spreads without asking permission. Foxglove. Beautiful, dangerous, holding within its furry leaves the medicine that will eventually become one of the most important heart drugs in the world, but only in the right hands. Valerian. Lets people sleep, lets people rest, is the thing you reach for when exhaustion and fear have wound themselves together into something impossible to live inside. St. John's wort. Smells like sunlight, takes darkness from the winter mind, grows on every hillside in England if you know what you're looking for. Belladonna. Beautiful, lethal, also potentially useful, also potentially deadly, the plant that requires the clearest thinking and the most honest acknowledgement of what can go wrong. Wolfsbane. The one that asks hardest questions about what a healer is and what a healer owes. These are not just plants. You understand this now completely. They are not curiosities in a garden. They are not old-fashioned remedies that medicine has surpassed. They are the primary care system of this entire village. They are what stands between a fever breaking and a fever killing. They are what 30% of the children born in England will be grateful for, without ever knowing why they survived when another child in another village did not. And they require knowledge, the kind that doesn't stay in books, or not in books alone, the kind that lives in hands and in practice and in the careful transmission from person to person, season to season, the way you sit beside someone who knows and you watch and you listen, and your hands learn what your mind can't fully hold. You crouch to the first yarrow crown and feel the new growth, ferny, dark, insistently alive. Good morning. Months pass the way months do when you've made your peace with the rhythm of a thing. Summer in the garden is a controlled urgency. Everything ripening at once. Everything demanding harvest at its specific peak. The days long enough to work and still full of more work than days contain. Your baskets fill and the drying racks fill and the beams overhead accumulate their bundles layer by layer. By August, the cottage smells like a concentrated version of the garden in full sun, which is the smell of everything good that herbs can offer distilled into a single space. You make the St. John's wort oil this year yourself under Marjorie's eye. The flowers packed into the clay jar, covered with the best olive oil you can get. Not good in Derbyshire in 1321, but functional. Sealed and set in the window where the sun can work it. 6 weeks later you pour off the most extraordinary red gold liquid you've ever seen, stained by hypericin from the flowers, smelling of warm resin and summer. Now you know how to make it, Marjorie says. Now you can make it without me. You make the chamomile oil too. You make the lavender oil. You help with the valerian root harvest in October, digging alongside Marjorie again, and this year your technique is better, and your back is accustomed to the work and the smell is still extraordinary and familiar all at once. You take a new delivery to Eleanor Hartley, who now has a proper comfy bed that you helped her establish in the spring. Her husband's winter cough has been better, not gone, but better, with the comfrey chest poultice you showed her how to make. She tells you this with the particular satisfaction of someone who has done something effective in a situation where helplessness has been the default. Her 5th baby is healthy and round and sleeping in the basket beside the table. Robert Alderton has been back 4 times over the course of the year. His face is not grey anymore. His heart, he says, feels steady. He says it in the tone of a man who is expecting to die sooner rather than later, and has revised his expectation carefully with the knowledge that this could change again, and he should not take it for granted. I told my wife, he said on his 3rd visit, about what you've been giving me. What did she say? Marjorie asked. She said she's known about women like you since she was a girl, that her own mother came to the woman who kept this garden before you. He looked around the cottage. She said this cottage has been keeping people alive longer than anyone remembers. Marjorie made no comment on this. But you saw something in her face. Not pride exactly. Something more like satisfaction. The satisfaction of a person doing work that has been worth doing. Bea has come back to the garden again. This time not in need, but curious. You've shown her the difference between mugwort and southernwood, because knowing the difference matters. You've shown her which yarrow to pick and when. Small things. The beginning of knowledge. The chain continues. Winter evening. You're reading, or trying to read. The text is a fragment of a herbal that Marjorie acquired last year. A partial copy made by a monk at a scriptorium somewhere to the south. Itself a copy of an older text. The transmission uncertain at every step. The Latin is imperfect, and the text is water-damaged, and the monk had clearly in places been working from a source he only partially understood. But there are things in it. Things you haven't seen in Marjorie's practice. References to plants you don't know by these names, cross-referencing them with the garden, trying to match description to species, working from the physical descriptions of smell and leaf and growth habit. It takes you an hour to establish that what the text calls by one name is almost certainly what Marjorie calls by another name entirely, and that the preparation described in the text is different from the one Marjorie uses, and the difference is potentially significant. You bring this to Marjorie. She reads the passage, reads it again. Where did you find this? In the text, the 3rd chapter, near the passage about the Artemisia family. A long pause. I've read this text 3 times, she says. I missed this. Another pause. Make the preparation as the text describes, she says. With a small amount, controlled, using a sample I supervise. We'll see if it's different. This is the moment. Not dramatic, not flagged. Just a Tuesday evening in January with a fire going and a candle on the work table and 2 women looking at a damaged text together. But this is the moment when the knowledge moves forward, when what Marjorie knows meets what you found and produces something neither of you had before. This is how it's always worked. Second spring. You're 18 now, a different person than the girl who came through that gate 14 months ago, with her mother's hope and a bundle of clothes and a letter of introduction that Marjorie read and folded away without comment. You know things. You know the garden in every season and every light. You know it in the grey of early April when the first yarrow is showing, and the smell of cold damp earth is the smell of beginning. You know it in the full green riot of June when everything is alive at once and the air is so thick with scent it's almost a physical presence. You know it in the bronze slant of October when the roots are ready and the harvest is complete and the garden is preparing to sleep, pulling its knowledge down into the earth for safekeeping. You know Marjorie, or you know what she lets you know, which is more than most people get. You know the particular humour in her eyes when you ask a question she's been waiting for you to ask. You know the way she moves in the cottage versus the way she moves in the garden. More deliberate in here, more quick outside, as though the soil under her feet changes something fundamental. You know when she's running on reserves and when she's properly rested and when something has troubled her that she hasn't shared. You know the village. You know who has what growing behind their house and what their grandmother knew and what was lost between generations and what can be recovered. You know Thomas the Smith and Eleanor Hartley and Robert Alderton and Bee and the young priest Father Edmund, who has made his peace with the cottage and its work in the particular way of a sensible person who knows when the alternative is worse. You know now the full weight of what Marjorie said at the beginning. The knowledge changes you, changes what people expect, but also, and this took longer to understand, it changes what you can see, what becomes visible. The girl who came here 14 months ago walked through a village and saw houses and fields and people going about their days. You walk through the same village now and you see what's growing in every garden, and you see the symptoms of the cold winter and the insufficient harvest in faces and postures, and you see what's available and what's needed and the gap between them. The garden gives you a way of seeing that is not everyone's way of seeing. This is what it means to carry the knowledge. Evening comes in the way it comes in spring, late, reluctantly, the light taken forever to go. You've done a full day in the garden, the first real full day of the season, the day when the garden opens properly and there's enough to do to fill every hour. Your body knows the tiredness of this particular day, not the flat exhaustion of winter, the working tiredness of spring, the tiredness of muscles used properly, of hands back in the soil after the long cold. Your back aches pleasantly. Your hands are dirty, and the dirt is under your fingernails, and the specific smell of the garden is on you in layers. comfrey and lavender and fresh earth, and the sharper note of wormwood from the pruning. You wash in the basin. The water is still cold. April hasn't warmed anything yet. And you wash your hands thoroughly because certain things have to come off the skin and not wait. Marjorie is at the table writing. She writes slowly. She learned late from the same sources that gave her the manuscripts, and her hand is functional rather than practiced. But she writes. She's writing down the preparation for something, the new preparation from the text, the one you found, which has been tested now over the winter on 3 controlled cases and has, all 3 times, performed as the text suggested it would. She is writing it down so that it doesn't die with her. You stand in the doorway for a moment and watch her, the fire behind her, the bundles of dried herbs above, the small jars organised on the shelves, the smell of everything this cottage is and has been. "Come eat," she says without looking up. "You do, later, in the bed, in the dark." The cottage sounds, the occasional creak of settling timber, the small sounds of the fire dying down, the distant sound of an owl from the direction of the wood. You close your eyes. The garden runs through your mind like a catalogue, plant by plant, but not like a list. Like a living thing, like visiting friends, like walking a path you know so well your feet don't need to think. Yarrow at the east corner, spreading but managed. Comfrey in the central bed, enormous and permanent and reliable. Mugwort in the far corner, doing what mugwort does, occupying its space and asking for the respect of its history. Foxglove along the north wall in only its 2nd year, just beginning to build into the plant it will be. Valerian, the tall silver-green stalks of it, the sweet strange smell of the summer flowers, lavender along the west fence, chamomile in the bed. Marjorie calls the beginner's bed, the forgiven one. The belladonna in the corner with the wolfsbane, both of them doing what they do, present, controlled, not to be forgotten. St. John's wort on the hillside waiting for July. All of it in the ground, waiting. All of it alive in some sense, even in winter, even now pulling its chemistry down into the roots, storing the summer's work in a form that will survive the cold. You have the particular kind of tiredness that is the good kind. The kind that comes from a body used as it was built to be used. Outdoors, physical, in contact with soil and living things. The kind that doesn't carry worry with it, just the clean weight of a day done. Outside, the village settles into night. Other fires dying down in other cottages. Other people reaching the end of this day and the beginning of sleep. Tomorrow there will be more to do. There's always more. The garden doesn't stop, and the people don't stop, and the knowledge doesn't stop accumulating, and there's always more to plant, more to understand, more to pass on. But that's tomorrow. Tonight you are lying in the dark, listening to the cottage settle, and the owl hunt, and the very distant sound of the church bell marking an hour you're too sleepy to count. And somewhere in that settling, somewhere between the owl calling and the fire going finally quiet, something changes. The boundary between your thoughts and the night outside blurs. The catalogue of the garden stops being a catalogue and starts being something else. The smell of comfrey in your hands, the weight of the basket, the feel of cold earth, the extraordinary smell of the first lavender you ever crushed between your fingers on a February morning that feels both recent and centuries ago. The body remembers what the mind is starting to release. 700 years will pass. The garden behind Marjorie Brandt's cottage in Derbyshire will not survive. The cottage will be rebuilt, then replaced again, and eventually the land will be used for something else entirely. and nobody alive will be able to point to the specific strip of earth where the comfrey grew, or where the mugwort stood in its corner, or where the foxglove was coming into its second year. The knowledge will survive. Not all of it. Some of it will be lost. The specific preparations, the particular combinations, the situated practical intelligence that lived in hands and couldn't be written down. That knowledge has been lost and found and lost again across the centuries, and the losses are real. But the core of it survives. The yarrow will still stop bleeding. The chamomile will still calm. The valerian will still, reliably, let you sleep when sleep won't. Come on its own. The foxglove will still regulate the heart, though you'll call the active compound digitalis and find it in a pharmacy rather than a garden. People are still growing these plants, behind their houses, in their gardens, with the specific knowledge of what they're for and why they work and when to use them and how much. Women, mostly, though not exclusively. The knowledge was always women's knowledge, and it still skews that way, against all the centuries of effort to separate women from the power of this knowing. It survived. Through the burnings and the accusations, through the systematic suppression of empirical women's knowledge by institutions with other agendas, through the centuries when she grows herbs was a thing that could get a woman killed. Through all of it, the knowledge moved, hand to hand, garden to garden, the same way Marjorie got it from her teacher and passed it to you, and you, in your turn, passed it to someone else. The chain didn't break. And tonight, wherever you are, in whatever century you're sleeping in, the lavender in someone's garden is still holding the same oils it held in Marjorie's garden. The valerian is still, somewhere, putting down roots that smell impossible. The yarrow is still on every hillside that hasn't been entirely paved over, still feathery and dark and ready. The medicine is still there. The knowledge is still moving. That's all it ever needed to do. So rest now. Let the catalogue of the garden slow and quiet. Let the smell of chamomile and lavender and fresh earth settle around you, the way it settled around Agnes Wharton in a cottage in Derbyshire in the year 1322. Let the cold April morning fade into warm darkness. You've been somewhere real tonight, not the sanitized history, the real one. The mud and the cold and the extraordinary smell of it, and the weight of the knowledge and the women who carried it through everything. Let it settle in, the way the roots settle into the ground at the end of autumn. Going deep, going quiet. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and rest and tomorrow, and that's more than many. Let the garden go to sleep. Let the owl hunt in peace. Let the fire die down to coals. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Take it. And whatever dreams come, let them smell of lavender and good English earth. Good night.